And away we go. So we've written kind of created our blank payment page. We finished our checkout. We've used an extension library so that we can serialize a complex order object, write it to a session variable, and this extension will basically write it as a JSON string to the session object so we can retrieve it later. Now we need to go ahead and look at Stripe. So I've already given you the link and asked you to register. So let's have a look. So Stripe gives us a couple things we'll have to look at. It gives us kind of a pre-built checkout page with different front ends, HTML, React, Next.js. Obviously, we're interested in an HTML front end. And then it's got a whole bunch of code libraries for the back end. So they've got a few sample files here. This is their server file. We'll kind of adapt to what's here for creating a checkout session. We'll do it a little bit differently. We'll mostly use what's here. It's got an HTML page that kind of looks like this. And it's got a link to a couple JavaScript files, including the main Stripe JavaScript library. And then ultimately, it'll have a success and cancel pages. So we'll configure those. Now, we're going to need to log into the Stripe dashboard. So in here, in this link, there's also a link here to the dashboard. So we're going to want to leave this open, but we're also going to want to go to the dashboard in a new tab. So inside of your Stripe dashboard, we'll need to go and look for our API keys. Now, I've already got a store set up here. You may need to create a site or create a store. I think you may need one, or it may prompt you, or may ask you to create an account. You have that option, create account, new account here. So if so, go ahead and create a new account, and you can just call it the last chapter or Comp2084, doesn't matter. So this would allow you to, for example, create multiple stores. If you were using Stripe in multiple projects, you could create a different one in each. So it shows me I'm in test mode, which is good. And we're going to need, in here, we need to get our API keys. They've kind of hidden this a little bit, so bear with me. Okay, so it's under developers and API keys. So if you just go to dashboard.stripe.com, I guess I didn't realize developers was a link. So you can just get it here by clicking on the word developers. I'm not sure, Jacob. You can try it, I don't know. So when you click on developers, you got here, and then on the left, there's in the subnav, there's a link for API keys. And it says, I'm viewing test API keys. So if you wanted to turn your store live, it would give you new keys. So we're going to need to add these keys to our appsettings.json. So we've got a publishable key, so there's our public key, and then we've got a secret key, which we're going to need both of these. So let's go to appsettings.json. And after the authentication section, we're going to set up a Stripe section. And Stripe calls their two API keys. It calls it a publishable key and a secret key. So I'll use those same names in my JSON. And now I want to copy these two values from the Stripe dashboard into our app settings. So I'm going to copy. So the publishable key will start with PK, and it'll have underscore test because we are in test mode. So I'll paste that in, and then I will display and copy and paste my secret key as well. So I'll click on reveal test key, confirm my password, and now I'll copy, and it will start with SK underscore test. Again, if this was a real site, once you do all your testing and turn it live, you would have to replace these keys with the production keys. They will not have the words test in them. But we don't actually want to charge credit cards today. We just want to simulate this. Normally what I do if I'm building a site with credit card payments, I will use the testing sandbox for my payments. But before my site goes live, I need to test out the real keys. So how do I do this without incurring, expensive charges on my credit card? Typically what I would do is put a product in the store that costs 1 cent. I would change these to the production keys, and then I could do some testing, and I would charge my credit card 1 cent, which I wouldn't worry too much about. But good idea, once you change the keys, you still want to make sure that the payment is not broken before your site goes into production. So we've added those keys into our appsettings.json. And then we can kind of go through the docs. It tells us that we need to install the stripe.net NuGet package. So there's a built-in library for Stripe. So I'm just going to do this through the visual editor. I'm going to go to Tools and NuGet Package Manager. We'll go back to the package manager window, and we'll install the stripe.net library. So in Browse, make sure you click on the Browse tab here. And if you search for Stripe, we want this one, the most popular, Stripe.net by Jamie Davis, 10.6 million downloads. Portable class, this is the official library from Stripe. So I'm going to click on my project, and I will install the latest stable version, Stripe.net. Accept the terms. I'll build my solution. I get a little green check mark here telling me that Stripe has been installed successfully. If I go to Solution Explorer and open my dependencies and packages, we can now see Stripe has been installed. So let's go back to the docs. So it now wants us to create a checkout session and define a product to sell. So this is in here in the docs. We'll come back, we'll build the HTML first. So in this little window, if you click on checkout.html, we're going to take most of this, but not all of it. And we're going to need to modify some of this that's here. The first thing I want to do is we need to add these two JavaScript libraries. We need the polyfill script, and then we need to link to the main Stripe JavaScript library. So these are lines 6 and 7. Again, you click here in the documentation on checkout.html. Let's just copy those two lines. And we're going to paste them into our payment view. Now, a lot of the other stuff here, this just gives us this form. The docs are actually a bit incomplete, I find. We need to add some JavaScript here. So we're going to build this. We're going to put on a button. Checkout button. We'll have it say pay now. We're going to have to provide, we also have to provide the our public key. So we're going to write some JavaScript here. Now we need to get that key from our appsettings.json. This is a little bit complicated. In our views, we don't have direct access to our configuration values. We're going to read this from the view bag, but this is going to be a little bit tricky. It doesn't have, as I said, it doesn't have direct access. So we're going to need to go back to our payment method in the controller. And we're going to have to do a couple of things in order to actually access the key. So this is actually going to start over in our startup file. So we need to open up our startup. And down below our configure services, we're going to use the singleton class, which we'll look at, to read a config value and pass it to a controller. We're doing this in order to use the Stripe API. So what is this singleton? We'll have a quick look at some documentation. I'll explain what this is. So our controller, our shop controller, needs to read this value from our config file. So we've got 3 different ways where we can register a dependency when our application starts up. They're all similar. this article describes the difference. If we have some kind of dependency that we only need one instance for the whole application and shared among all requests, we can use this add singleton method. This will make a dependency available for everybody using the application. If we want to scope it, this dependency per individual HTTP request, we would use add scoped. Or if we want to recreate the dependency on every request and every user, we could use this add transient method. We basically only need this so that we can read our Stripe keys out of the config file, and they're the same for every user and every request. So we only need to register this dependency one time. So we're going to use services.add singleton. So we want an I configuration as our dependency. This will give us access to the app settings. We're then going to need to modify our shop controller so that in its constructor, when the shop controller gets created, it also receives an instance of this iConfiguration class. And we'll need that in order to read appsettings.json in the controller. I know it's a bit messy. There are a few other ways we could get to the app settings values here, but this is kind of the recommended way, even though it's not super clean. None of the alternatives are either. Okay, so we're registering this dependency, making our configuration values globally available to all the controllers. So this is going to require, in order to use this, it's going to require us to make a change to our constructor here in the shop control. We don't care about the constructors in the other controllers because we don't need our configuration values there. So in here, so I'll declare an instance. It doesn't recognize this. So I've got to reference the Microsoft extensions.configuration. And then we're going to modify the constructor, which right now takes one dependency. It takes our database object. It's also going to take a configuration object. And then we're going to populate our variable. So our controller requires both a database connection object and it needs the site configuration object, because we can't finish the process in the controller without both of these things. So now we can use this kind of class level variable in our checkout so that we can access the API keys. I'll leave this code up for a minute. So I've modified lines 21, 24, and 27 to include our configuration here. So I'll save that, and then I'll go back to my payment method, and we should be able to use our iConfiguration variable to now grab the publishable key from appsettings.json. Go back down here. So then from the Stripe section, we can read that key value called publishable key. And we'll store it in the view bag. So now we should be able to go back to our payment form and write the rest of the JavaScript that will get invoked. Save those changes. So the only thing the user is going to see on this page is a button that says Pay Now. And then we're going to use JavaScript so that that button will then invoke the Stripe payment process. So the user doesn't actually pay on our own site. And this is better for security, liability. We want them to pay on Stripe's site. Then Stripe handles things like PCI compliance, liability, all of that. So I'll just try this out right now. Go back to my cart, check out. So this is what I get. So when I click Pay Now, we want to use JavaScript to invoke the Stripe payment process. And we need to include that public key. So that's why we're including it in we've got to send it down to our JavaScript file. We're going to reference our checkout button and add a click handler here. So when the user clicks the button, we're going to add an event listener here. On the click event, I guess we'll do it this way. I'll just write, sorry. You're probably more used to seeing it this way for now, so we'll just write it this way. As an anonymous function, so we're going to create a new Stripe checkout session. So we call the fetch method here. And this is going to go to shop process payment. So we're going to call that. Our method is post. And then we're going to chain some methods together. So we're going to get a response back from Stripe. After we get a response back from Stripe, we then will get this checkout session. So we're going to redirect to checkout and pass in the session ID that we've generated. And lastly, we'll get a result back. Whoops, sorry, this goes here. So we're going to evaluate the result. If Stripe gives us back an error, we'll show a JavaScript alert box with whatever error comes back. And I think we need a catch here as well. So we're primarily using JavaScript. Unfortunately, Stripe has updated their docs. Their docs used to include all this JavaScript for us to just copy and paste. They've changed them now. So we're grabbing the key. In order to call the redirect to checkout, we'll need this key. Now, we haven't written any of the server-side code yet, but we can try this and see what happens. Does this actually invoke anything when we click the Pay Now button? We will see. So I've got my cart, the checkout. So I get to here. Okay. So it's clicking is calling the shop.processPayment, but we don't have that method yet. So it's making a behind the scenes call. If I look at my browser console, okay, I thought I'd get a 404 error. So now we'll need to go ahead and write this method we're calling called process payment. And we'll get most of the code from here, from this server.cs. We'll be able to take some of the code here for this. So we'll go to our controller. We're going to write our post method for shop process payment. We're going to have to be logged in to do it. And our method is HTTP post. So first we'll want to get our order. From the session variable, this time we're going to call getObject. That's of type order. So we're getting the session variable called order. We need to get the customer's email as well in order to create the new payment. So the Stripe wants to know what's the email address of the customer. It also wants to know how much is the payment. And in the Stripe documentation, it actually processes the payment in cents. So we've got to figure out how much our order is worth and multiply it by 100. So we need to go and look at all the items in the user's cart, figure out how much they're worth, and multiply them by 100. So using this link query syntax is kind of neat. Because it can actually, we can do this in one line. We don't have to like get all the items and then loop through them and do a running total. We can fetch all the items and do the math in a single command. This will give us a single value telling us how much the cart is. Now we need the secret key. So now we're going to read this. It does not recognize our Stripe configuration class. That's okay. We need to make a reference to it. So we need to make a reference to the Stripe library. That solves one problem, but it creates another one. Now my order line here, it's underlined. Order is ambiguous because we have an order class in our model, but now that we've added the Stripe dependency, Stripe also has an order model. So now it's confused when we're casting this, it doesn't know which class. So we want to pick, we're casting this as our own model. So I'm going to change that order to models.order so it's clear. So now we want to create and populate our payment object to send to Stripe. Again, we need a reference here. We're using the Stripe checkout class now. We want to create a payment and set the options. So we're going to need the reference, our checkout library. Our payment method type, we're only taking one payment type, which is called card. We have to supply at least one line item, but to keep it simple, we're not going to pass every book. We'll just pass the total. So now we've got a line items. There'll be a new list of session line item options. Oops. We'll set our price data. This is where we're going to have to supply the amount of the purchase, ultimately. So our amount is going to be our total times 100, which it'll complain about. Our currency will be Canadian dollars. And our product data, this is the longest class name I've ever seen. Session line. It's this one. Ridiculous class name. Session line item, price data, product data options. Price data. And we'll just set the quantity as 1. We're not going to list all the individual products. It'll just be a bulk purchase. Our mode is payment. And the last two parameters here are a success URL and a cancel URL. So when we go to, the user goes off to Stripe, if the payment's successful, where do they come back to? And if they cancel the payment, where do we take them? So our success URL will make the request.host a variable, so that way it will work both locally and on our server. And our cancel URL if they cancel the payment, we'll just take them back to the cart page if they choose to cancel the payment. I know that's a lot. There's no way to kind of do this piece by piece. In order to invoke Stripe, we're going to have to supply everything. Now we've got a data type mismatch here because our total is a double. And they want this to be a long. So we can just choose this option to add an explicit cast. So it'll take our total that we've calculated here, multiply it by 100 to get the value in cents, and then it will cast it as a long integer, so it matches what the API wants. So this is creating the payment object. I guess this would be so we're going to create a new Stripe session. And then we're going to pass in our options. And then after we invoke it, it's either going to return a success or maybe the user will cancel it. So we're going to want to redirect to one of those URLs. So we can add a header, a location header. With a redirect status code. 303, which is redirect. That's a lot. I get it. I'm going to put it up on Git right now. We'll have to just play around and test it out. So I'm going to try it and see if it will invoke the Stripe payment page now. And if so, if my payment works, I should get taken to a blank screen, but my URL should be /save order. A long integer, it's an integer, it just allows, it's larger than a regular integer. So it's got a bigger memory capacity than a standard integer. I think if we compare them. Let's see if we can see. Yeah, so it's basically twice as big. So an integer is 16 bits. And a long integer is 64 bits. So it allows you to store a bigger number. Okay, so int is 32 bits and long is 64. So twice as big. So I'm going to try this. I don't yet know if I did it right or not. Only one way to find out. Yes, that's right. Okay. Okay. So we've now got the same issue here as well. When we added the Stripe class, we've now broken our checkout method. Same problem. That order class is ambiguous because now we've got our own order model and we've got the Stripe order class. So just like we did in the payment, to fix it, I'll specify this is our own order model that we're passing. It's not a Stripe object. Yeah, exactly, Megan. I think you've got the right idea. So now I'll try to build again. Go to my cart, go to checkout. Yeah, it gets kind of tedious filling this out over and over again. So now I'll see if this is actually going to invoke Stripe. Not yet. Do we get any errors? Okay, no error in my console. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to try with my debugger for a moment and see if our method ever even gets called. I'm going to start debugging. We'll try again. Okay, so our code's never even getting in here. So our URL is right. It's calling shop, processed payment. We're using post. Okay, well, let's see why. I'm going to go check my sample project for just a second. I think we're close. Just going to compare what we've done. Good. I didn't put in a form tag. Don't know that I need one, but I'll give that a try. I'll put my button inside of a form. Post. I don't think the form is necessary. So we've got our JavaScript. I'll try again. If not, we're close. Aha, I did need to put it in a form. So finally, it now invokes Stripe. Right? It has the name of my store. It says we're in test mode. It's got our line item, just says the last chapter purchase with a total. And now I'm set to pay with my card. So the piece that was missing, if I just go back, was my button. I needed a form to actually submit. That was my missing piece. So I'm just going to update GitHub again with that change. So if I cancel, I think I can just hit back. This then calls the cancel method and takes me back to my cart. So I know that was a fair bit of code, both JavaScript in the form and server-side code here in the process payment. As I said, there's really no way to test this out incrementally. We need all of this in order for Stripe to get invoked. But this code is also set up now that we can receive, if the user fills out the Stripe form, we should get redirected to our save order page if Stripe deems the payment successful. So we are going to try that out when we come back. And if that works, we'll then need to build a page to save the order to the database, save all the items in the cart to the database as well, clear out the cart, clear out the session variable, and then we can generate an order confirmation that we can scaffold and then customize. Are there questions about either of these pages so far? I realize there's some stuff here that's unfamiliar. This is largely coming right from the Stripe docs. Okay, everything that I've done so far is up on GitHub. So if you're behind, feel free to use that as a reference. We'll come back and we'll finish this process and complete the checkout and saving of the order when we come back. We'll come back in 10 minutes.